Hi Janeites, and welcome back to the What the Austen podcast. This is episode number 37, and I've got Caily joining me because this is an anniversary episode for the podcast. We're celebrating 2 years of the pod, which is so crazy to think about. I can't believe it's been 2 years. That's honestly so mad to me. But it's been such a wonderful journey. So we thought we'd do a fun episode where we chat a little bit about the podcast journey, but then also we thought we'd do some unpopular opinions and hot takes, specifically focusing on Pride and Prejudice. So I put a request out on my Instagram, and I also did a bit of Reddit scrolling because the Reddit feed on Jane Austen is always hot. So I thought I could do both, and then we've picked a couple of topic choices to talk about today. So I think that's going to be really fun, but it's going to be a chilled out episode. So grab a drink, grab a blanket, chill out with us for a little while as we celebrate 2 years of What the Austen.
Oh, I can't believe it. Happy birthday to the podcast. And I cannot believe it's been 2 years. I remember when you reached out to me and asked me to be a guest on one of the episodes. And I was just so excited for you to do all of the different topics. You just had so many incredible ideas, and I can't believe it's been 2 years since we recorded our Colonel Brandon episode, and it's just been so cool to see how far the podcast has evolved since then.
I know. You know what? I love all of the episodes that I end up doing with people, but those first couple of episodes, talking about Colonel Brandon and everything, I thought that was such a great way to start the podcast because I always love talking about like the characters that are a little bit more obscure. So I love that we kind of went full force into like Colonel Brandon as opposed to starting out with someone like Darcy. It was just so enjoyable to do a deep dive on him, and I honestly have such a different perspective on him now. So I'm so glad that we started there.
I loved that too. And that's so true. I think when you read a book, obviously you're dissecting different aspects of the protagonists. And it's really those secondary characters that don't get enough focus all the time. And so I think it's so fun to do a deep dive. And you picked so many amazing characters to analyze. Like I loved the one you did with Edward Ferrars too, and Harriet Smith. I think it's just, it makes it so interesting. And it's so incredible when you can read the book once and have one opinion about someone, and then you read it a second or third time, and then they completely change in your mind. So I loved doing that.
Yeah, I love that as well. It's definitely something that I've taken from doing the podcast and speaking to so many different guests is, my gosh, like my thoughts and ideas on the books have changed so dramatically over the past 2 years, just because I've been like absorbing what other people have been saying. And not that it like completely changes my opinion, but sometimes it just adds a different element that I've never thought about before. And I'm like, I can see that. And also just on the Instagram as well. Like obviously I started the Instagram before the podcast. And it's just amazing, like the amount of friends and incredible conversations that I've had through starting like the What the Austen content. It's just been amazing. And I love expanding my own viewpoint on Jane Austen.
You've done such an incredible job bringing in all of these members of the Janeite community. Like a lot of the guests on the podcast, I keep thinking, oh my gosh, I would want to be friends with this person. They're so smart. They're so interesting. And yeah, it's just amazing how, you started off, the first episode was a deep dive of persuasion. And then we started doing the character analyses. And then it's incredible how, we've done these literature analyses, but then you can also do the fun crossover episodes. Like I love that you did the Taylor Swift comparison and the Disney. It's just, you're so versatile, and it's just such an amazing way to look at Jane's novels through multiple lenses.
Absolutely. And obviously I couldn't do this without all of the wonderful guests who come on, and, obviously all the guests are friends as well. So, their support outside of the podcast means so much as well. And obviously Caily, you've been like a rock, my rock for like this whole process, because, there are times when it's amazing and I'm on a total high with it all. And then there's times that it's tough, it's sometimes I struggle, to be creative with it, and I just get into a funk. And yeah, you're always there for me. You're always like, you're doing great. It's fine. We got this. You're gonna be fine. So yeah, that's always meant so much to me. And I know I tell you that all the time, but it really does. It makes such a massive difference that I've had you throughout this whole journey.
Oh my gosh. Well, I've loved being there with you in the highs and lows. And, you know, the reason you'll get down about it sometimes is because you care so much and you want to put your all into it. And I think that really shines through. And there are so many people that you've impacted through this process and people who feel connected to you. And it's amazing to have that community, because I think particularly through and in the aftermath of COVID, a lot of people have been struggling with their mental health, and they need Jane Austen. They need their love of Jane Austen to inspire them, and they need other people who share that love to feel connected to. And so that's why I think that this podcast is such an amazing thing too, because it brings people who never would have met together over a common shared love.
Yes, I love that. I just love the community aspect of it in general as well, because before I started the Instagram page and the podcast, I had no idea that the community was even there or how big it was. I don't know why. It was just something that I never thought to even look for on social media. Like, I don't know if you felt the same. Like, it was just something I never looked for. And then when I started my page, I remember my older brother, he works in marketing, and he was a little bit like, I don't know if you're just going to be like speaking to the crickets, like, I support you and like, you know, you talk about your passions, but he was like worried that there'd be like nobody on the other end. But he was like, I can't believe there's so many like Jane Austen fans out there. And I'm like, I know, right? We're such a massive community. It's amazing.
Yeah, it was the same thing. You know, quotations really inspire me and ground me when I'm feeling a little lower. And so I started my page not necessarily for Jane Austen, but to just do a quotation a day. And a lot of my favorite quotations are Jane Austen quotes. And I was, you know, learning how to use the hashtags, and I wrote hashtag Jane Austen, and I clicked on it and I found all of these Jane Austen fans. And I remember right away I found your page, and I was like, what, the Austen? That's such a cool name. I love that handle name. And I loved the quotations that you had posted. And I remember, I think when I found you, you only had maybe had 6 posts or something, and I
6 followers. I was like, probably.
we both were like starting out, and I remember right away I was like, I want to connect with this girl, and it's just it's so amazing what it's turned into, and we got to meet this summer. I just love it. It's totally changed my life.
I know. It's so wild to think. Like, obviously, I mean, we live in like, you know, worlds apart. Like, you live in the US, I live in the UK. We never would have met if it hadn't been that we obviously both started our pages and everything. And so that's so wild to me. Like, stars definitely aligned for us to become friends. And that's just, it just honestly blows my mind a little bit. But yeah, it's been amazing. Like, just making friends all over the world, just for a fellow love of Jane Austen, I think is incredible. I really do. So we did, it wasn't actually an anniversary episode that we did last year, but it was when we were covering the Harry Potter houses for the heroines. And we kind of mentioned that it was like 1 year of the podcast. And I think at that point, the podcast had 3,000 downloads in total. Like, that was the full amount of downloads that we have. And as of this date, we have 20,000.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
I know. I was like, that's like a lot. That's like a massive jump. So I'm just like, wow, that just like blows my mind that people, you know, have been loving the content that much. It means so much to me because I do just put so much heart and soul into it. So I'm like, you know, it's amazing to see that. And I try not to get too caught up in the numbers and everything, because then you get on like a road of like comparison and everything. And I'm just like, no, I need to, you know, do it because I love it, not because I've got certain stats coming through from it. But yeah, it's just nice to see that growth. And I was like really struggling with like, you know, am I doing the right things with the podcast? Am I making the right content and everything? And Nick kind of sat me down and he was like, let's look at like the journey. Like, let's look at it on a graph. Let's see where it's been going. And he was like, you know, even you way surpassed even doubling the amount in like a year. So he was like, this is, you know, you're growing like exponentially. It's definitely, that's a good sign. Hopefully it's because people are enjoying the content.
Yeah, and I know that you don't do it for the stats, but with the amount of work that you put into it, it's nice to see the growth, and it's nice to know that there are a lot of listeners out there that, you know, you may never meet, but you've impacted them in some way, and they're really connecting to the content that you're putting out there.
Yeah, I hope so. And that's why I'm really excited to start uploading the content on YouTube. Like, this is the first one that's coming out on YouTube. Because I just think that's going to be like such a nice way to grow. And also I feel like people can get more connected to me, but also to my guests. You know, you can see our faces and, you know, see our expressions, my over expressions for things.
Like weird hand gestures.
I just feel like, hello. But I just think that's going to be, I'm really glad that that's something that I've chosen to do now, is kind of like the next step for the podcast. Because I actually really love watching video podcasts. Even if I have it on in the background, I don't know why. Sometimes I just really like to see people's faces and I'm just like chilling there and everything. So yeah, I'm excited that this is kind of like the next step for the podcast.
Yeah, I think I love that too, because I think that also just accommodates a lot of different learning styles. Like, I work with a lot of neurodivergent clients, and that's one of my biggest passions. And some of them like to listen to podcasts, but they need some kind of visual too. And so that's just an easier way for them to engage with the content. So that made me really happy as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the more accessible I can make the podcast, the better. You know, I try and do that obviously with the transcript. And if you guys didn't know, there's always a transcript available for every single episode should you need that. And I always attach that at the bottom. But yeah, I feel like the video content as well. I get that, like, I have to have like so many things like going on just to keep my mind clear. Like, you see, even if I've got the podcast on and it's the video version and I'm doing something else at the same time, like, for me, that's just, yeah, it makes it easier for my brain to function if I've got a lot going on around me.
Yeah, and if you do it on YouTube, you can do captions too, right?
You can do captions, or if you're like crazy like me, I listen to most things on YouTube at like 2 times the speed. I don't know if anyone could do that with my voice personally, because I know I talk really fast, but yeah, I listen to other YouTubers on, you know, double the speed. I genuinely can't listen to things like slowly.
That's exactly what I do as well. And I always tell, that's one of the accommodations for my clients that I give, is if you're having a hard time focusing when you have to listen to something, put the video on 1.5 or 2 times speed, because people with ADHD at least can attend better to people who talk quickly, actually.
Yeah, it definitely makes the world difference to me. I just like switch off if I'm you know, I've not got ADHD, but I've got ASD. And for me, I just like, my mind just wanders. I'm just thinking about something else, like something super random, like, you know, I don't know, the different colors of different birds or something, like something super random. If I don't have it on like fast, right, you know, it's keeping my mind engaged.
Yeah. And I think too, some people just like to see the faces, like to see the laughter, and just like you said, the expression. So I think this is great, and I'm glad that you've taken that step.
I know, I'm so excited. And obviously, like, I started my personal YouTube as well, which I was really excited about, because yeah, I'm just really loving creating like this video content, which is handy because video content's kind of taking over the world at the moment. So yeah, I'm excited to see where all this goes. And obviously, Caily, you're right there with me, my right-hand man, right-hand woman. Can't wait till I get to 50 episodes, because then I get another certificate from Buzzsprout. Like, I'm such a weird nerd that I loved getting the certificates, but they cut them off at like 10,000 downloads. And I was like, no, the certificates, I loved those. So I don't
What do the certificates do? It's just like a little reward.
It's just a downloadable certificate. But I was like totally feeling them. I used to love getting them through. I don't know why. I think maybe because I tried not to get onto the stats. So when I got the little certificate, I was like, oh, that's so nice. That's just like, you know, happy achievement day. I've got them all like saved in a folder as well. I kind of love it. But I don't get another one until I hit 50 episodes, which is super sad. But if anyone from Buzzsprout, or if you work for Buzzsprout, if you're listening, please can you change that so that there's a certificate for forever? That would be great. That would be great.
It has to be, you have to make 50 episodes. It's not, oh, I thought you were saying 50,000 listens.
Oh no, that would be great though if they had another one. No, I was like, I've topped like the amount of listen certificates I can get. Like a 10,000 listener, like 10,000 downloads was the last one. So the only certificates I'm eligible for now is the how many episodes you've made. But 50 episodes is a lot, right? Like that's quite a lot. Like obviously I'll get there eventually, but yeah, it's been a massive gap between certificates now.
We'll make you a certificate, Izzy.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, great. So it would be good to move on to some of the topics that we picked out. So thank you again to the people on Instagram who put some ideas out there for unpopular opinions and hot takes. So yeah, on Instagram, I had a few come through, but I decided to, just based off what came through and what I found on Reddit, I decided to just make it Pride and Prejudice specific. I think it was easier to just like put it into a category. So yeah, all of the unpopular opinions and hot takes today are going to be Pride and Prejudice based. So I'm really excited to do this. Actually, this is the first of this type of episode. And if people do enjoy this content, then let us know, because I'm more than happy to make more episodes like this, because I think it's really fun.
Yeah, I think this is such a wonderful way to celebrate the podcast's anniversary, because we all love Jane Austen in this community, but sometimes it's absolutely hysterical to see comments from people who don't love Jane Austen, or people who have opinions on the novel that you would never think of. So I just think this will be a really good laugh.
Yeah, no, I think so as well. I love that as well. Like, there's just like, I feel like even when you love Jane Austen, you're always going to have certain like strong opinions on specific things. Like everyone knows I have really strong opinions on Mansfield Park. So the first topic that we actually have on the list today is one that came through on Instagram, and I'm also going to tie it to one that I found on Reddit as well. So the Instagram response said, "Why is everyone so in love with Darcy if Tilney exists?" So referring to Henry Tilney from Northanger Abbey. And the Reddit post said, most women would hate being married to Darcy, even a modern version of him, especially because he can't take a joke. He must learn to laugh at himself. The real perfect man is Henry Tilney. So I was like, I wanted to put them together because I was like, wow, that's like two people saying the exact same thing. And I was like, we've got to chat about this, because I feel like a lot of people jump on that like Mr Darcy is like this perfect man or like the perfect catch. And I'm like, I feel like Henry does kind of fall to the wayside for a lot of people a lot of the time.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I see both sides of it. But I agree with you. I think Mr. Darcy gets way too much credit. Like I feel like Placed way higher than all the other Austen men. And I don't think that's fair. I see why someone would want to be with Mr. Darcy. Like Mr. Darcy has that chivalry. I think the fact that he saves Lydia from disgrace and he comes back and asks Elizabeth a second time and disregards his family and his aunt's opinion. I think the reason that people might see Mr. Darcy as a like more powerful character is that he really puts himself on the line for Elizabeth in so many ways. Like if you think about it, he shows up with such effort to win her. And Henry Tilney, I wouldn't say is a super chivalrous character in that way. He doesn't really do anything to fight for Catherine, in my opinion. But I would totally fall for Henry Tilney over Mr. Darcy, I think, because he's so playful. He has such a funny sense of humor. They have shared interests. He's kind of witty. He pokes fun at her a little bit. Like, he is so charming. Yeah. What do you think about him?
So, yeah, I do love Henry, but something that I was thinking about from what you said is, do you think it's because of the heroine that's the case? Because you have to work harder for Elizabeth, because Elizabeth is just like so outspoken, such her own person. Like she's just so opinionated and just isn't going to take any BS from anyone. And also you've got to bear in mind that Elizabeth had been fed all of this information from Wickham, so she's got all these like preconceptions about Darcy, so he really has to fight for her. He's not like starting on an even playing field here. Like he's got to like build her back up to like a normal level and then make her fall in love with him. Like there's a lot he's got to do. Whereas for Henry, Catherine's like smitten with him from the first ball. She's literally just like, when will I see Henry next? I feel like Northanger Abbey is such an easy romance. I feel like that the biggest dynamic in Northanger Abbey is actually the friendship with people like Isabella Thorpe. In terms of like the romance side of the storyline, I think it's super easygoing. They don't have like too many problems to deal with in their storyline. I think the biggest one is that Catherine assumes that Henry's dad killed his mum. But I think that's about it. That's like the only major thing that comes up. Whereas for Elizabeth and Darcy, it is like molehill after molehill. Like there's problems popping up all over the place and they have to go on more of a journey. Yeah.
I completely agree with that. I think Pride and Prejudice, it is a drama. You're right. They have to overcome so much, and Darcy has to change so much to win her because, just like you said, she has such high expectations for him. Whereas with Henry, it feels like he and Catherine are two best friends sitting on a couch about to watch Netflix if they lived in the modern day, and they're joking and laughing and playful. And maybe something about that is more realistic to certain relationships. A lot of people say you should end up marrying your best friend. And so I do like their playful dynamic, but maybe it's less dramatic. It's less,
but maybe that is the good thing. Maybe that's the point that someone was making on the Reddit post where they said, in real life, you'd rather be married to Henry than Darcy, because I don't know if they could overcome the power struggle that's obviously present there. The fact that Darcy even has the thought process where he's like, I'm going against my family's expectations, and I've got major issues with the fact that you're not very wealthy and your family are, aren't great socially. So do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like, yes, I know that he develops from that point and comes to just love Elizabeth regardless. But I'm like, would you want that point of contention? Like, I feel like that could come up again in an argument later in your life, if you just rubbed each other the wrong way for whatever reason, like, that power dynamic could come back.
Oh, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think what I like about Henry and Catherine's relationship is it feels more natural. And I do see them staying together forever. But they didn't have to overcome that much, like you said, so it's kind of anticlimactic. Whereas Darcy and Elizabeth come from two different worlds, different natures and everything. They have to overcome so much so that by the end when they get together, it's so climactic, it's so satisfying. And they still have a lot to work through. And, I could see some couples counseling and potential divorce if they don't work out some more of their issues. I think the grain of hope is that there's a line that says something about Darcy opens up and mellows out and is a little bit more playful because of Elizabeth's influence on him. So hopefully that happens. But yeah, I agree with you.
I can get that for sure. I think what's great about Henry and Catherine as well is they already have so many things in common. Like, they have similar interests. Like, there's loads of points in the books where they talk about the novels that they love reading. They both love Gothic literature and Radcliffe's work. And I think in that sense, that's something that goes beyond just like the romance or the passion that you have for each other, and more the chemistry, just like the physical attraction. And I think that's the thing that maybe does like enjoy. I don't think you have to have exactly everything in common with your partner, but you've got to have things that you can do together that isn't, like overly intimate. Does that make sense? Just like the general day-to-day stuff and like activities or interests or how are you going to spend time together, like in each other's company? Whereas I feel like Elizabeth and Darcy is very just like high energy. Like you said, there's like a lot going on. It's a bit wild and crazy. And it's like, well, what happens when things are mundane and back to normal? What do you bond over then?
And it's very, I love that you said that. Darcy and Elizabeth, it's very serious. I know Elizabeth herself is described as lively and playful and loving a laugh, but she's very intense with him and a little bit defensive. And so there's just a lot of intensity to that relationship. Whereas Catherine and Henry, it's just so lighthearted. And just like you said, you could see them just reading a book together and giggling. And there's something kind of sweet about that.
Yeah, I think so. But Devil's Advocate, I did see a couple of comments on the Reddit post that said that Henry Tilney's a bit patronizing, and maybe that would become an issue like later on. I don't fully see that myself. I think he's like really sarcastic in maybe this is just because I grew up in like the UK and most people are really sarcastic and just, you know, we kind of take the mick out of each other a lot of the time, but in like this kind of sarcastic way where you're just, you know, poking fun at people. And he does that, like he's really, really bad for it. And so I'm like, I don't know if I see it as patronizing, like I just see it as banter, but I'm like, I can understand why other people might see it as, I don't know. What do you think? This is probably good to ask you, considering, you know, you grew up in the US.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I see why people would say that he's patronizing, but I agree with you. The way I define patronizing is when you say something like, I know better than you, and I'm going to be like pretty condescending about it. And instead of using the word patronizing, I would use the word incredulous. I think he's very socially savvy, and he sees people's flaws, and he sees the certain social dynamics that Catherine doesn't see. And I think he's kind of incredulous by her naivety. And I think he's kind of like, oh my gosh, she doesn't see that this person's a total a-hole, but he kind of finds it endearing. And so I feel like he's trying to tell her, but in a way where he's still like thinks it's super sweet and endearing. I don't think he's criticizing her or trying to condescend to her. He's taking the, well, this is such a British thing to say. I think it's banter too. I think he's kind of like, is that taking the mickey? Is that?
Yeah, taking the mickey. Exactly. Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well. But that, you know, you just made me think about something there as well, is Henry's very good at letting Catherine kind of make her own mistakes or realize like what social or realize what friendships aren't good friendships. So he lets her like figure out the Isabella situation like on her own. And he does say like, you know, he does give a few hints here and there, but he doesn't outright say to her like, Isabella's a bad friend, like you need to ditch her. Whereas Darcy he interferes in social situations that he doesn't think are right. Like look at the Jane and Bingley situation. Like he doesn't go and ask like, you know, Elizabeth, like, you know, how do you feel about this? What do you think is going on here? He doesn't ask Bingley, you know, what are your feelings? What do you think Jane's feelings are? This is not a discussion. He's like, I know best. I'm splitting them up.
Oh, you just blew my mind with that. That is so true. I feel like Henry sees how naive Catherine is, and he wants to give her hints. He wants to give her a little bit of a heads up. He does it in a playful way that I don't think is condescending, and he's still really endeared to her, and he likes her innocence. But if you care about someone and you see a bad dynamic, you don't want them to get taken advantage of. But you're right. He doesn't do it in a way that's super condescending and controlling. He respects Catherine enough to let her make her own decisions. That's such a good point. Whereas Darcy is arrogant enough to look at Jane and Bingley, make an assessment of the dynamic that was incorrect, where he's like, oh, Jane doesn't like Bingley, she'd just use him for his money. Doesn't get advice from anyone else, just makes that arbitrary decision. And then I can never get over the hypocrisy that he takes Jane away from Bingley and then is like, but I'm going to go after Elizabeth now. Okay. Yeah.
I love that he's like, he tries to make the point that he was being kinder to Bingley by separating him. He's got to suffer because he can't separate himself from Elizabeth. I'm like, oh my God. And can we just as well, like, can we just, like, Darcy's first proposal, I'm just like, I don't think I'd ever recover from that. That would sit with me. Like, some of the stuff that he said, I'd be like, look, I know you went on a journey and you did some great stuff, but I feel like some of those things would, like, linger in the back of my mind. I'd be like...
Yeah. Oh, man. I'm, like, just thinking of all the different...
like, we actually hate Darcy.
Oh, my God. Yeah, what he says about her family. Do you expect me to rejoice in the inferiority of your connection? Can you imagine someone saying that to you after they walk into the room? You think they pseudo hate you. You have no idea that they're in love with you. And then he just goes, you must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you.
Right?
By the way, your connections suck.
I am like in a whirlwind with you, friend. Like, I don't know what's going on. I actually love in like the 2005 one that she's literally just like gobsmacked, like, what, where the hell has this come from? Like, what are you on about? Yeah.
And then they add the part 2 where at the end of that, it looks like they're about to make out. The whole thing is so push and pull.
I know, it's like so all over the place. And then he's like, I love how instantly he needs to rectify the whole Wickham situation. He's like, I must write a letter about all of this, like, and then like writes his life story. Like, for somebody who's been reserved for most of the novel so far, he really just like puts all out in this letter.
I know. Oh my gosh. It's in written form. Like, if it got on the wrong hands and she decided to be spiteful, that part, actually, that is again, they have such an intensity. That was very intense of him to do, but I also thought that was really brave of him to do, like, that he owned everything. And yeah, that makes me like him a little bit more again.
Yeah,
I'm all over the place too, clearly.
He was already vulnerable to propose, and for Elizabeth to reject him, and not even reject him slightly, to be like, I'm rejecting you and I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to lay out your flaws right here. And then to go and write a letter where you basically talk about basically the mistakes you've made in the past and how it's like impacted your family. And also being like, I also interfered with my friend and your sister, but I'm okay with that situation that I did that. Man, yeah, he really lays it all on the line in just like that short amount of time. It's like,
yeah, it is such whiplash. It is so intense.
And this is going on when so many other things are happening. Like, they're visiting like Lady Catherine, Fitzwilliam's popped up on the scene. The Collinses are pottering around. It's
pottering around. Perfect way. Collins. Oh my god, I love that so much. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I bet that Elizabeth, when she rejected him the first time, I bet that was the first time he had ever been criticized in his life, with all of the sycophants and flatterers around him. I bet that's the first time someone put him in his place. Yeah, I seriously. He was treated like a king.
Yeah, I can see it. And so that's like sometimes why I struggle to compare the heroes, because I'm like, if they come from such different dynamics, and then the heroines that they're after are so different, which I think Catherine and Elizabeth are, I think it is slightly different. But I agree. I think in terms of passionate, exciting romance that, you maybe want at some point in your life, like Darcy and Elizabeth is like, that is exciting enough. Or if you want at the start of your relationship. But I feel like what Henry and Catherine have is something that you've... Oh my God, I'm sorry. That's the ice cream van.
Ice cream van that comes to your house?
It doesn't just come to my house. It obviously comes to all of the houses. I'm just like my personal ice cream van. But
oh my gosh, you want to go get some ice cream? I'll wait for you.
Dairy.
Oh, that's right. Okay, never mind.
Really, it's just cruel. He just drives past and plays his tune, and I can't eat any of it. So funny. I can't remember what I was saying there, but I think I was saying that Catherine and Henry is, I think, what you want long term.
Yes, I agree. I think you want to be in, I think everybody wants that passionate, intense dynamic like Elizabeth and Darcy, and even on a more dysfunctional level like Wickham and Marianne, you want that really, just really dramatic, intense emotions. But in the long term, you want something more steady and lighthearted with shared interests like Henry and Catherine. The only thing that I would say that I would also want long term that I don't know if Henry has is, I don't know if I'd want him to be so far in the background. Like, I do like that Darcy is really stoic and takes initiative sometimes. I think I would feel like protected and supported by the strength of Darcy's personality and the action that he takes.
Yeah, okay. I think that's definitely something interesting. And I think, so I was just thinking this from like my own perspective, is like Catherine and Henry, like Catherine's quite young when they first meet and they basically like grow up together. And it made me think of that, like my relationship with Nick is like, we met when we were 18 and we've kind of grown up together as well. And I'm like, I feel like it's good if you meet younger, to have that space where you can still grow as an individual. Like, do you know what I mean? Someone to like not tell you what to do, or not say to you like their own opinion, just be like, you know what, this is my thoughts, but like I'm gonna let you live your life and make your own mistakes. I think that's good when you're young, if you meet someone when you're younger, because you still grow as your own person. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm making any sense there.
No, that makes a ton of sense. I do think the point that you meet your partner in your life has a huge impact, and it should, if it's a healthy dynamic, it should influence the way you show up. Like, I have a close friend who met her now husband. They've been together for over 10 years, and they never would have worked if they had a dynamic where they had to be like front and center forefront in each other's lives nonstop. Like, they were really good at showing up for each other, being there for each other, but also they went to different colleges. Like, they let each other explore their individuality, and they weren't each other's everything. And that's why they ended up together and are in such a healthy space. So I totally get what you're saying. Yeah, I don't know what else.
We do not have an answer. Like, yes, loads of people love Darcy, and I genuinely think that's maybe just because I think Pride and Prejudice is just more well known and more popular, and people have seen the adaptations probably more than people have read and watched the Northanger Abbey adaptations. So maybe that's why it feels like there's more people who love Darcy over Henry. But I think once you've like read them all, I don't think it's as black and white. I don't think it's as clean cut as Darcy's the best and all the other heroes fall at the waistline. I mean, do you have a favorite hero?
Mr. Knightley.
Yeah, I'd say probably Mr. Knightley's mine. Maybe like a mixture of like Mr. Knightley and, I don't know. Oh gosh, now we're getting into, I don't even know why I asked that, because gosh, that's a hot topic in itself. But yeah, I like Mr. Knightley as well. So I feel like it is different once you've read all the books, because then you can take a better perspective if you look across the board at the different qualities and then what you want personally in a person.
I thought Edmund was your favorite, is he?
Do not speak to me about that.
He is not a huge fan of Edmund.
Doesn't even fall in my hero category, okay?
Yeah. I get it. Well, you love Fanny too, so it makes sense.
I'm starting to think it's not that I hate Fanny, is that I actually really dislike Edmund. In the fact that Fanny is so into Edmund just bothers me entirely. I'm literally just like, you know what, Fanny, you could have done so much better with somebody else. I could have liked you so much more had you, gone for someone else, because I feel like Edmund is totally problematic. But oh my gosh, I'm going to get into I could sit here for like 10,000 hours talking about Edmund and Fanny and Mansfield Park in general. So let's not get into that.
We'll go there another time. But I did love what you said about the exposure to Austen. I think you're right that Pride and Prejudice is the probably most exciting plot to follow. And I just think Pride and Prejudice has had the most exposure. So Mr. Darcy might be talked about because some people have only heard of and read Pride and Prejudice. And so if they had read all 6 novels, just like you said, they might not necessarily have Darcy be their favorite. And also I noticed that polarizing characters with a lot of strength in some ways, people tend to be more magnetized to those characters. So.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I think that's a great way to wrap that one up. Ready for the next one? Because this one's going to hit hard as well. I'm not like messing around here.
I know. Oh my gosh. I'm nervous for this one.
Okay, so the next one was both. I got it twice on Instagram actually. And so I'm going to read out both comments that I got on Instagram because I think they're both really good and they kind of cross over in my mind, but we'll see where the conversation goes. Pride and Prejudice 1995 and 2005 are separate entities and I can love both equally without comparing them. And then the other comment was, for 2005 Pride and Prejudice chose beauty over substance and it disappoints me every time. So I feel like these are two separate conversations, but I feel like they may cross over. So I just wanted to read both of them out. So your thoughts on this whole, like, I mean, I know it's like a point of like massive debate in the Jane Austen community, like people like in the 2005 and 1995, the who's the better Darcy argument, which gosh, that gets people heated. But yeah, I'd love to know your thoughts on the two adaptations and whether or not you can love them as separate entities or if there is room for comparison.
That's interesting, the two comments that you just read. I disagree slightly with both of them. I think you can love the 1995 and 2005 version for different reasons, which is true for me. But it's impossible not to compare them. And I think it's okay to compare them because they are the same story. Read the second, what was the second comment again?
Okay, so the second one said, the 2005 Pride and Prejudice chose beauty over substance, and it disappoints me every time.
I think that's too harsh. I see the point, and I think the 2005 version has stunning cinematography, absolutely beautiful, but I don't think that's fair because I think they're trying to portray the state of the Bennet's lifestyle in a really realistic way. Like, there are pigs and chickens around, and there aren't beautiful ball gowns all the time. I think in a way it's kind of rugged. It is beautifully done, but
oh my gosh, okay. I feel like we're going to totally disagree on that stance in particular, though. Like, I think the 2005 one, they don't portray the Bennets well at all. Like, I think they get why they're like living, like, I get that they have an estate, and on the estate they probably have farm animals and like a farm situation going on, but they're literally like living in the farm. Like, they got pigs running through the house, and like they do their own like laundry and everything. And I know the Bennets are like struggling for money, but they're not at that point, I don't believe, like in the book. Like, I don't feel that. I'm like, I get that they're maybe a little bit tight on cash, but they're still, able to live a genteel lifestyle.
Oh, and that's more what I'm saying is that's why if you labeled it as beautiful, I don't think that's really fair because they kind of portray them in this as living in dirty conditions, and they sort of exaggerate that because, yeah, in the book, it's a little bit more genteel, but I think 2005 is trying to really exaggerate the class differences. So what I would say is I'm biased. I grew up with the 1995 miniseries, and I had seen it probably at least 50 times. Like, it just was totally ingrained in me from a young age. I just loved it. I just loved it. I had every line memorized. I like that the 1995 version really includes all of the important aspects of the plot, in my opinion, and they honor Jane Austen's language. I understand that sometimes you have to modernize the language so that people can understand, but they really use her language and they don't modernize too much, and the plot doesn't feel rushed. And so the 2005 version, to me, in recent years I've appreciated it more. I think there's more of that intensity and humanness. The chemistry is so palpable, which is so funny because Jennifer Ellie and Colin Firth actually dated in real life, and Keira Knightley actually dated the Wickham actor, not Darcy. But you can just feel the palpable chemistry in the 2005 version, and there's a humanness to that one that I really like. But as far as the plot goes, I feel like the language is simplified, and I feel like the plot is very, very rushed in the 2005 version, and I don't appreciate that aspect of it.
Yes. No, I really agree with that. Something that I love the 2005 one, but like you, I grew up with the 1995 one, and that was like fully ingrained in my brain when I was like, in primary school. Like, I literally was raised on that. That was, I was just set up to be a Jane Austen fan. And yeah, I mean, did I ever tell you that I went to World Book Day dressed as Elizabeth Bennet? So I was in primary school, so I must have been like 7 or 8 or something. And I went to World Book Day dressed as Elizabeth Bennet, and nobody knew who I was. It was so funny. My mum made me an outfit with like a pillowcase so that I could dress up as Lizzie Bennet. So funny. But yeah, no one knew who I was, obviously, because I was like 7, so nobody had read the book. But I was going, my mum was like, it's a book, so you can go as Elizabeth.
So oh my gosh, I would have known, Izzy. I would have known who you were, and that just makes me more and more be like, we were destined to become friends, because I did the same thing. It wasn't even an event. we were going to the grocery store and I like put Jennifer Ellie's mole right here and like did the curls around my head. Like really, it was very extra.
Oh my God, I'm dying. That's so funny. But yeah, I grew up with that one, so I'll always love it. And for me, I feel like the comparison comes between the book in the 1995 one, full on one side, and the 2005 full on another. I feel like that is an artistic expression of the novel and the story, whereas I feel like the 1995 one, like most BBC adaptations, is a very accurate portrayal of the plot, the narrative, and the characters. And something that really bothers me about the 2005 one is because they cut out scenes, they cut out a lot of character development from some of the secondary characters.
Yes.
I mean, for one, we're missing one of the Bingley sisters, which I think does make a massive impact on Caroline's behaviour. I think like the other sister eggs are on. I feel like we see Elizabeth having to put up with a lot more when it's two sisters as opposed to one that she's having to deal with. We lose so much of Mrs. Gardiner's character development and her support of Elizabeth. And oh my God, that annoys me so much. So some of you may have not read this, but I actually wrote an article for the Jane Austen Literacy Foundation. It was in their, they have like an article, or they put issues out. It's called Pride and Possibilities. And I wrote a whole article on Mrs. Gardiner because I truly believe she's a very significant character. And I think she's incredibly impactful on Elizabeth's journey. So it upsets me that we don't see more of her in the 2005 one, because I feel like we see the Gardiners more as a pair, and I don't think Mrs. Gardiner gets enough airtime on her own to show like what a strong and impactful character she is in her own right.
Yes, and if you haven't read that article at all, it's so good. You definitely need to read it. Izzy did a great job. And I agree. Mrs. Gardiner is so important because I think the fact that Mr. Darcy is truly fond of the Gardiners, that is part of his whole character redemption too, that he does, when someone has a good personality and a good sense of morality, he does respect them regardless of their status. So I agree with that. I just think exactly certain character development, they don't have time for it. And then I agree with you on the artistry. 2005 is such a beautifully artistic movie, and it captures the emotional intensity of the character so well. I love all of that. But I think a lot of the actors in the 1995 version are better too, and more accurate depictors of the characters from the book. For example, we all know that Judi Dench is a phenomenal actress, but I think the 1995 Lady Catherine de Bourgh does a much better job. And I also, for as endearing as Mr. Bennet is in Mr. Bingley is in the 2005 version, I think they exaggerate him as sort of this bumbling idiot and like really socially unaware and kind of dumb. And I like his depiction a lot more in the 1995 version. And I think that depiction shows that he's more Jane's equal. So that might be an unpopular opinion.
No, I love that. I think in the 2005 when he comes across really young and immature, and I almost feel as if it's like Jane has way more maturity in, I don't know, just wisdom than Mr. Bingley, and I don't think that's quite right. I feel like they're set up to be equals. Yes, they've got those more like softer undertones to their personalities. They're much more sensitive people, but I don't think I don't think that's portrayed well in the 2005 one. I think it shows that, but then it also shows this like weird dynamic where Mr. Bingley kind of appears a bit like a child that needs to be like ushered around by Mr. Darcy. Whereas in the 1995 one, I think it shows that maybe he's not like that strong, bold character who can stand up to Darcy, but I think it shows that he is still a respectable and, you know, confident person in his own right.
Exactly. Yes. He's a catch. He is really sociable. He's the one who carries the social dynamics in the friendship. That's why it's so annoying that they have Mr. Bingley be like socially inept, because with Darcy and Mr. Bingley, the reason that they are on even playing fields is Darcy is actually more socially awkward, and Bingley's the one who connects with everyone. He's so charismatic. He sees the best in people. And then, the reason that he can't stand up to Mr. Darcy is he's just a little bit naive and doesn't want to think badly of people, but he's not some bumbling idiot. So I'm glad you understand that. And yeah, for whatever reason, Rosamund Pike with that actor, it just seemed more like a maternal son. It just, yeah, he seemed young for her and mentally in every way. Yeah.
Well, you also remember that Mr. Bingley is not stupid. Like, he is thriving new money. You know, his family have come up from trade. His father set up and he was really successful. They don't yet own their own estate. That's why he's renting Netherfield. And basically Mr. Bingley's part is like second generation wealth in their family, is that he is trying to find an estate and he's trying to build connections so that he's more established in, you know, genteel society, which is why Mr. Darcy and his friendship is so amazing, because in terms of, you know, family standings, Mr. Darcy's got like way deeper roots in terms of like wealth and society compared to Mr. Bingley. But, you know, Mr. Bingley's still like obviously got a thriving, you know, entrepreneurial side to him, and he's like running all of the money for his sisters because obviously his father's died. So he's like the man of the household, and he's only got one sister married. So he's still got another sister to worry about. And yeah, I don't for 1 minute consider him to be, you know, stupid. He goes to London for business. That's like one of the reasons why he, you know, leaves.
Exactly. I'm so glad that you understand my perspective on that. I just found it belittling to Mr. Bingley's character in the way they portrayed him in the 2005 version. But I think that this might be an unpopular opinion because I know a lot of people love that actor and find him very endearing in that role. But
I think he is endearing. Like, I wouldn't say he's not. Like, I think he is endearing, and I think he's really enjoyable to watch. But yeah, I think I think again, that's just like character development's just become lost. I think because they've had to condense it down so much, they have to take out certain aspects of people's personality so that it fits better. I think about even Wickham. Like, I think they maybe mention. No, actually, I don't think they mention it. The Mary King situation, maybe they do, like slightly. But in the 1995 one, we actually see him like starting to dance with Mary King and starting to like interact with her. Then we see Mrs. Gardiner being like, I'm not sure about this. Like, he seems like a bit of a gold digger. And, you know, the red flags are kind of set before Darcy even says to Elizabeth. And so there's already people who start to turn the wheels for Elizabeth and like that Mr. Wickham's maybe not this great guy. And, you know, she still holds to her guns that he is, obviously, because she goes and like confronts Darcy about it. But I think all of those things are important, and we do lose that in the 2005 one. We lose that in a lot of the film adaptations compared to the, you know, the BBC ones where they have the leeway of having more time. Like, I'm such a sucker for the 2009 Emma adaptation. Like, to me, that is perfection.
Okay.
And honestly, no film matches up for me with that one. With the Pride and Prejudice, I'm a little bit more like, I like both of them, but with the Emma, I'm just like, no, friends. It's 2009 or nothing.
oh my gosh, I have seen that one. I'll have to rewatch it though, because I didn't have that reaction of it being so above and beyond the other ones. So I'll have to go back and give that another chance for sure. But yeah, I think you're right. I think we have to, in fairness, the 2005 version, because it's a movie, had to condense. But I just think the story, I appreciate the slower build of character development and the air of mystery and the nuance that's in it. And I think it makes it a much more powerful story. So maybe Pride and Prejudice is just better served being a miniseries of some kind. Yeah,
but then so many people came into it, didn't they, from the 2005 one? So it obviously captured people's hearts, because I know so many people that their introduction to Pride and Prejudice was, or their introduction to Jane Austen even, was the 2005 adaptation. I can kind of get it. It's beautiful. It's exciting. It's just, yeah. And I love all the earthy tones. I'm here for earthy tones, like, you know, greens and browns.
Yeah, and I am forever grateful that it did get Jane Austen so much publicity, and so many people love that version, and I enjoy that version. And maybe, you know, in fairness, the 1995 miniseries, it's a commitment. It's a lot of time, so you have to get really into it. I have to ask you, which Mr. Collins do you prefer?
Oh, 1995 for sure. He is so creepy and cringe. Oh my gosh. Like, he's got like greasy hair and it's just, oh, it's bad. It's bad, friends. It's in his dancing. Oh my God. Honestly. I know when he's like, gosh, don't. I kind of, yeah, and I feel like that portrays Mr. Collins really well, especially if you pick up on the kind of more evil undertones of his character, compared to the 2005 one, which I think showed him more as like more sympathetically, that you could pity him more and kind of just feel bad for him, like he's just a bit of a weird guy. But you know what bothers a lot of people though is Mr. Collins isn't actually short. Like in the book, he's not described as short. I think he's even described as tall. Like he's, I don't know why they picked that. I'm guessing for like some sort of like power struggle between him and Darcy, but I'm like, yeah, that was a weird choice that 2005 decided to carry on with.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, he's described as tall and kind of bumbling, like having an awkward gait, which, oh my gosh, David Bamber does so well in the 1995 version. He's just like tripping everywhere. Like, remember when he's in the carriage, he almost falls out and he's like, have a care, Dawkins. Like, it's just so awkward.
Remember when he walks in on Lydia? Oh no, Lydia comes out in the hallway and she's like half dressed. And
oh my gosh.
What to do? Like, oh my God. That's actually brilliant, honestly. Oh.
I love that so much. Yeah, I think you're probably right about him being shorter in the 2005 version so that it would just, yeah, the power struggle with him and Darcy. That's smart. And he just looks awkward with Keira Knightley because she's pretty tall. Yeah, so I, above and beyond, love the 1995 Mr. Collins, but I will say I do really like the scene with the flower and then Keira Knightley's face being like, oh my gosh, what a creep. And like when he's dancing so close to her face. So he does a good job too. Yeah,
I agree. I don't have too many. There's obviously actors and characters that I prefer in the different adaptations. And most of them do fall that I prefer the ones in the 1995 one, just because I think they more accurately portray the book versions of the characters. But and I never got into that whole like argument between like Matthew McFadden or Colin Firth. Like I just don't. You couldn't replace either Darcy and pop them into the other films. Do you get what I'm saying? Like they are very much elements of their own movie, like their own films and TV series. You couldn't change them over, and because you can't change them over, I'm just like I struggle more to compare the two Darcys than I do the two mediums. Does that make sense? I'm like I can compare the TV series to the film, but comparing the specific Darcys, I'm just like I don't know, because they fit the content that they're in.
110% agree. When you said that, I've never even thought about that. I was like mentally going like this because I was trying to think of Colin Firth in the 2005 and vice versa. Yeah, it wouldn't work. They're well suited to the productions they're in, for sure.
I think so. I think they soften all of the characters for the 2005 one to make them more accessible to people, because I think there's nuances to all of the characters in Pride and Prejudice that I think to all of Jane Austen's characters, you know, she's very clear that people aren't perfect, they've got flaws, and she is not shy about showing them. Whereas I feel like in the 2005 one, they're a little bit like, let's just dampen people's flaws a little bit so that they're not so obvious. Let's have some more perfect people out here. Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I love Mr Bennet in the 1995 one way more than the 2005.
I love Mr. Bennet in that version. He just has such a twinkle in his eye, and the way his sarcasm is perfect in the way he interacts with Mr. Collins, the way he smiles at Lizzie. The one thing that I'll give Donald Sutherland credit about is when he talks to Lizzie about Darcy's proposal, and he's like, I'd never part with you for anyone less worthy. When his eyes well up with tears, that part really touched my heart. So I was like, all right, Donald, you redeemed yourself in that moment. But for all the rest of it, I love that 1995 Mr. Bennet. And I also love Mrs. Bennet, too, in 1995 version.
Yeah, she's so funny. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, like, we're just suckers to the 1995 one. What can we say? It's just when you're raised on it, that's just it. It's just ingrained, and it's like, but I like that both of us also enjoy the 2005 one. I don't have any issues with it at all. I enjoy watching it. I find it super enjoyable. It's also easier if I'm with people who aren't massive Jane Austen fans, but I want to watch Pride and Prejudice. I'm like, how about we watch the 2005 one? Because I know if I'm like 1995, they'll be like, hell to the no. Like, yeah. I'm not committing to that. So I'm like, that's an easier in for me. So, yeah, I mean, what can we say? I think you can enjoy them separately without comparing. I think people get sometimes too intense with the comparisons for them. I think they're both good in their own rights. And I think that they definitely did choose beauty over substance, I will say, in the grand scheme of things. But I think that makes sense because of how short the film is, and because it wanted to reach a larger audience. As amazing as the 1995 version is, I can understand why that didn't. Well, obviously it reached a lot of people at the time, but I can understand why it's not necessarily continued to keep reaching people like the 2005 one has. Usually people come to the 1995 one after they've seen the 2005 one now. So I think the 2005 one did a great job to bringing more people into the community.
I completely agree with that. I think it's impossible not to compare the two, but I think they have different things to offer in their own right. And as much as I do prefer and love the 1995 version, I do think that in addition to the cinematography and beauty portrayed in the 2005 version, I think there's an element of, like, how would I put it? There's an element of like empathy and empathy for the human condition, or like when Mr. Bennet is hugging Mary crying, like I feel like the 2000 version pulls at your heartstrings on an emotional level that I really appreciate.
Yeah, again, I think that's another reason why it's more accessible to people nowadays, because I feel like the 1995 version might be seen as a bit cold just because it's more accurately portraying the book, and people weren't necessarily as hands-on, and like that's why balls was such a big thing, because people were actually being intimate where they're not usually. So I think the 2005 one makes more sense, because otherwise people would be like, everybody's so mean and cold and just So this is one that I actually found on Reddit, but I found super interesting, and one that I wanted to chat to you about. So basically the post said, Mr. Bennet is a bad husband and father. And oh my gosh, this took me on a bit of a, rabbit hole of this like whole subreddit on people just like not liking Mr. Bennet and thinking that he's, really problematic as a father and as a husband and everything. And I was like, wow, like I feel like this is worth chatting about, because I have always really liked Mr. Bennet. I do recognize that he isn't the best of fathers to the younger girls, but I don't think it's necessarily intentional. I think it's actually just a personality thing, but I'd love to chat about it. What's your thoughts on this, that Mr. Bennet is this like bad husband and father?
Yeah, this is so interesting. I'm feeling kind of contemplative about it because, yeah, I've always loved his character. He has such a funny wit. His reactions to Mrs. Bennet are hysterical. Like, I think he provides a lot of comic relief in the novel, and his special connection with Lizzie is so endearing. And so I've always really liked him too, and kind of pitied him in a way, because it's clear he's not happy in his marriage. But when you read that, Mr. Bennet is a bad husband and father, I think that's fair. I think it's a fair comment. I think, he married Mrs. Bennet when she was really beautiful and young and everything, and obviously doesn't really respect her as a person. And of course, she's very annoying, but it's like he becomes disillusioned by her and then just uses her. It just makes her look ridiculous all the time and winds her up. So I think if he were a good husband, he'd be more reassuring of her and calm her anxieties. So yeah, as a husband, and he's not responsible financially. He retreats to his library. Mrs. Bennet, part of the reason she feels so frantic is Mr. Bennet isn't taking a lot of initiative and action to do things for his family. I don't know. What do you think about that?
That is true. I kind of get the sense that he's kind of like drowning in all of the issues, and as a result, is just like retreating into the world that he enjoys, just like reading in his library, being on his own, and just maybe burying his head in the sand a little bit, just about like everything else that's going on, which must be pretty overwhelming. I mean, he's the head of the household, and his household is made up of, like all women. It's just like, it's just loads of women, which obviously in this day and age is just like not in this day and age, in that day and age, is not very practical, because basically at least one of his daughters needs to marry well to secure the others, and he's got a lot of daughters to marry off, and also the estate's going to be entailed away to his to the cousin Mr Collins, who it's said that him and Mr Bennet and his brother didn't have a great relationship or something, and so that's probably, he's not too happy that the estate's been entailed away to that side of the family and things. So yeah, I can kind of see him burying his head in the sand a little bit, but yeah, you're right. I mean, he isn't a great husband to Mrs Bennet. But then show me an example in Jane Austen's work where they have a pretty, nerved and crazed wife and a husband that's really sympathetic and supportive. I mean, it makes me think of like the Palmers. Like Mr. Palmer is like over Mrs. Palmer. He's just like, nah, I'm not dealing with this. And even like the Allens, like if you think about Mr. and Mrs. Allen, when they take Catherine to Bath, like Mrs. Allen's like fretting about like, we don't know anybody, what we're going to do. This is all very awkward. Mr. Allen. And he's just like, he's gone. He's just like, I'm out of here. Think about the Musgroves. Mary is like crazy and like super anxious and nervous all the time. And Charles is, living in his own world, going on about random stuff. So show me an example of, this perfect sympathetic husband to the nervous wife.
All right. No, I can't think of one.
Just like, where is this husband? I just think maybe that was just like a common theme in Austen's work, that she kind of shows that dynamic, that it's kind of like the wife that's a little bit crazy and maybe a little bit more like socially obsessed than the husband who likes to retreat and it just hasn't got the time to deal with the craziness. But that's not to say that it's good and right. I think he sees a lot of his wife and the three younger daughters, and so that's why I think he kind of cuts them off. But also I was thinking about this earlier, and Jane and Elizabeth are like unproblematic children. Do you know what I mean? They're like self-sufficient. They do their own stuff. Jane pretty much is the mediator in the house. Like she keeps everything calm. So what does he need to do for them? Nothing. He even says, wherever you and Jane go, you will be respected and people will, want to associate with you. Your three younger sisters, that's a different story. But, he knows that he doesn't need to do any work for them the way that he sees it. He goes and calls on Mr. Bingley. I know he teases Mrs. Bennet about that he doesn't, but he does go and do that. So he does set it up that Elizabeth and Jane could potentially have a good match. But I don't know what else he necessarily needs to do for them. They're pretty sorted, apart from the fact that he could have handled his finances a bit better.
That is such a good point. And so, yeah, I think it's good that we give him credit that even though he was winding Mrs. Bennet up, he did go visit Mr. Bingley. So he did do the thing he needed to do to establish the connection. But apart from that, just like you said, I see this person's argument that he's not a good husband and father because of his apathy. Maybe he himself is nervous about the financial situation, but however he handled it, he kind of went into denial and didn't take care of things actively, and then kind of makes fun of his wife for fretting about it. Like he's the one who, he's not in control of the entail, but he's the one who put them in this more dire financial situation. And like you said, Jane and Lizzie are really self-sufficient and well-rounded, and he really could have used his influence in a positive way because he is a smart, measured man. And instead of guiding Mary, Kitty, and Lydia, he retreats and he makes fun of them to their faces. And he says that they're three of the silliest girls in England. And even though Lydia laughs it off and none of them really react to it, when you're a girl in your teens, you care so much about your parents' opinions, and there's no way you don't internalize part of that. Yeah, so I think that was really wrong.
That is true. And I actually feel the worst for Mary, because I feel like Mary isn't, being daft and embarrassing herself in society. I think she maybe accidentally does, like sometimes when she's like overexcited about playing the piano and things in public. And isn't that great? But isn't that great at singing? But I think in terms of like her interests, they aren't too far removed from what Mr. Bennet's interest is. She really likes reading. She really likes to have like philosophical, insightful conversations. Yes, they are heavy on like the religious side, which I think you kind of get the sense from Mr. Bennet that he isn't massively religious, in the sense that he kind of finds Mr. Collins and Mary kind of annoying, and we don't hear him say anything that sounds particularly like religious or faith driven. So, but I don't understand his kind of like why he pins Mary with Lydia and Kitty, because I don't see the similarities between them personally. I don't see Mary as silly and daft like Kitty and Lydia are.
She's not like vacuous, and she's not superficial. Like I think Lydia and Kitty are very into materialism, superficial things, boy crazy. She's not in that category. I think she's in a different category, but I think the reason Mr. Bennet doesn't have patience for her either is Mary's really pedantic, and she puts on airs like she's so knowledgeable, but she actually doesn't know the right thing to say. Like that line, Mary wished to say something sensible but knew not how. Like the fact I think like Mr. Bennet and Lizzie are both so socially savvy that when Mr. Collins is sitting there at the dinner table, Mary's looking at him like, oh wow, you're so smart, and Mr. Bennet and Lizzie are both like, oh my gosh, what an idiot. So I think it's more, he thinks Mary's ridiculous because she's trying to be this great intellectual, but she's not actually very savvy. But I agree, she's in a different category than Kitty and Lydia.
But I do think that Elizabeth and Mr. Bennet are quite harsh to people sometimes. Like, I think there's a reason that Jane Austen really likes Elizabeth, and I think it's because she had a similar way of judging people. Like there's so much evidence in her letters that she wasn't the most sympathetic of people. Like she would say some pretty harsh things at times, and she didn't mind like poking fun at people, even if it came across kind of mean at times. And I feel like Elizabeth and Mr. Bennet share that they're able to kind of, in their inside jokes, they do humiliate people. Like even if it's just between the two of them, they really do that. And I feel like they have this sense that they are kind of superior, even if it's not I feel like it's like an intellectual superiority, that they think they're like above everybody else, and they can have these private jokes and conversations that nobody else gets and knows about. And if you don't, then everyone else is daft in comparison.
I think that's especially fair for Mr. Bennet. I can't tell if I think it's more even a social intelligence. He and Lizzie are socially intelligent, and Jane is to I think a little lesser degree, or maybe the same, but isn't gonna make fun of people because
doesn't want to make sport of her neighbors like they do.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Oh my gosh. But I agree. I think the mean-spirited, it's more he's probably trying to just entertain himself, but he does belittle people in his family. He'll make fun of them, and it's not nice, whatever the intention is.
In defense of him in terms of the financial situation, though, obviously they needed a son and they wanted a son. The fact that a son never came, can we blame him for that? Like, that's not his fault that there was never an heir to the fortune, because having a son isn't just that the property gets obviously gets passed down to the son. The son has the ability to go out and make more money. And so the fact that Mr. Bennet is getting older, he's got this one estate, and he's got no one else to financially contribute to their family pot, I think is a massive burden. Supporting 5 daughters is a lot. Like, that is a lot of people to support, and your wife. That's a lot. And he makes the point of saying, like, even with Lydia getting married off to Wickham, like, he's saving because he was like spending so much money on her pocket money because she like spends like her money all the time. And so, yeah, I think in terms of financially, I think you have to consider that is that he is the sole breadwinner, because that's how it was back then. Like, the women couldn't go and get a job. And so it all falls on his shoulders. And I think that is a heavy burden to bear. And I don't think we can criticize him because he wasn't able to heir a son.
Yeah, I think that's so fair. I think the entailment system was so was so unfair, obviously, and it's not his fault that he couldn't heir a son. I think it's more, especially once he had a few daughters in a row. I remember there's this part where he basically says, "Oh, I didn't start saving up at the beginning because I banked on the fact I was going to have a son, and then when I realized, that might not happen, it seemed a little bit too late to start saving." So I just think he could have had a little bit more foresight and taken more initiative earlier to make sure that his daughters were, financially okay. And I agree with you that it was a huge burden. It was a huge burden on him, and everyone makes mistakes, and he clearly does have regrets about it.
Yeah, I can imagine so. Yeah. I think it's such a tough one. Like, I don't know. Like, I do see why he's a bad father, and I think there's worse though. I think there's a lot like this, worse parents or worse parent-child dynamics that out there for sure. But I do think for the younger sisters, it is pretty terrible. And gosh, I mean, thank God that Mr Darcy steps up, because I cannot see Mr Bennet being able to sort the situation with Lydia out successfully. I think that would have been it. Like you said, I don't think he has enough foresight to be able to deal with problems like that. I think he is someone that just retreats into his head, and if something becomes an external problem that he's got to sort, I think he has no skills whatsoever in. I don't know what he would have done. And obviously in the 2005 adaptation, they have the Gardiners with no children. But in the book, the Gardiners have like tons of their own kids anyway. So even though the thought is that the Gardiners pay for Lydia and for Wickham's commission and for Lydia and Wickham to get married, I don't see how they could have, for what Wickham wanted money-wise. I don't see how they could have done that, support their own children. For me, I'm just like, thank God that Darcy had such strong feelings for Elizabeth, because it would have been a mess otherwise.
Yeah, that's interesting. I had mixed feelings when you said that, because I agree that Mr. Bennet wouldn't have been able to resolve the situation. And I can't remember exactly what the quotation is, but when he thinks that Mr. Gardiner has been the one to save the situation, he's like, "Don't worry, Lizzie, I should feel badly about all of this, but I'll forgive myself sooner than I probably should." Like, he acknowledges his apathy a little bit, and his the fact that he doesn't take responsibility a whole ton. Like, he acknowledges his character flaws, and at the same time, he did step up and he did go to London and he did try to look for her. So, yeah, I think in this situation, I would think it's too exaggerated to call him a villain. I don't think he's a villain. I think he's a character that's in the middle. I think he's not the best husband and father in certain ways. I think he has a very tender relationship with Lizzie, where he's a great father at the end when he says, "I couldn't have parted with you for someone less worthy." Like, even though Mr. Darcy has a lot of money, like, he wanted to make sure that Lizzie loved him. That was him stepping up. And then I think he's an endearing, funny character. So he's just someone who's in the middle. He's a human. He has flaws, but also I still like him as a character, and I see his good qualities.
I mean, he's like an incredible father to Elizabeth, I would say, because he doesn't make her marry Mr. Collins, which Mrs. Bennet would have been right on that. Like, she even tries to.
Yeah, good.
Like, he's like, "You don't have to do that, because I'm not losing my like favorite child and putting her in a situation where she's going to be unhappy in a marriage." And I actually don't think he would have forced any of his daughters into a marriage they'd be unhappy with, because he knows what that's like. So even the daughters that he thinks are silly, like, I think the only reason, obviously, that Lydia and Wickham get married is because there is no choice in that situation. It would ruin the entire family if they don't get married. And Lydia, for all intents and purposes, is happy to marry Wickham. But I don't think he would have forced any of his daughters to marry out of love if they wanted to marry for love. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought up that point, and I realized, oh my gosh, I was not giving him enough credit. I think that's a hugely impressive moment on his part as a father, that he said you'll be at a loss to one of your parents, and he stood up and said, "I don't want you to marry Mr. Collins," because for him, that would have taken all the pressure off of his situation. If Lizzie had married Mr. Collins, The financial, all the entailment stuff would have been taken care of. That would have logistically been night and day easier and less stressful for Mr. Bennet. But he loved his daughter. He didn't want his daughter to be with someone who was lesser than her and an idiot. And that was a big moment where he stepped up as a father. So yes, I totally agree. He was a good father to Elizabeth.
I guess devil's advocate could be that he just didn't want Mr. Collins like more in his life than he already was.
Fair.
So I guess he could have like maybe said to like Mary, because we all kind of ship the whole marrying Mr. Collins thing. You could have been like, Mary, do you want to marry Mr. Collins? But yeah, I think that's like a massive thing that he doesn't do that. And I also think after the Lydia situation, he steps up more for Kitty and Mary. He's like, you are no way are you going away with any officers. I don't even want officers in my house. Like, it's just not happening, because I have learned from this terrible mistake that I'm not, you know, I can't go like put anyone through this again. So he really puts his foot down at that point. And I think that like when there's kind of the descriptions at the end of the books about like Kitty and Mary after, I think that changes their directory entirely. You know what I mean? They go on a different path. Once Lydia's out of the picture, you know, I can imagine that things are a lot better. And obviously the financial burden's taken away because Lizzie and Jane both marry really well. But yeah, I think he probably does step up a bit more after he realizes, you know, it could have been crisis points.
Yeah, I agree with that. I hope he doesn't overcorrect, and I hope Kitty was able to at least like maybe go out in society sometimes. But yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I don't think he would want his daughters to marry anyone they didn't love. I think he steps up as a father after the mistake he's made with being too apathetic surrounding Lydia. I also think one of his really good qualities is he's a good judge of character. Like, remember he laughs about Wickham being kind of a little bit sleazy. Like, he reads Wickham really well kind of before anyone else, and he'll make little comments here and there. And I think that those comments can have an impact too.
Yeah, I think that would sway Lizzie, because Lizzie's so proud about like her level of sense and judgment of people. And I think like his comments where he's like, you know, maybe it's your time to be crossed in love. And like he like says to Wickham, like, let Wickham be the man. Let Wickham be the man to break your heart. And I think those things would stick with someone like Elizabeth, because she'd be like, look, my dad obviously thinks that Wickham's not ideal, and I, as a result, also think Wickham's not ideal. I just think that's the kind of relationship that they have. Like, he has that kind of influence over it. It's not harsh and direct, but it's just like these subtle comments that will make a difference. I personally believe.
I think so too. And I think he can diffuse things sometimes. He either can inflame or diffuse things with humor, and his sense of humor just, I think, brings so much joy to the novel, I think.
Yeah, I do. I've always been a big fan of him, but I do find this like subreddit of Reddit really interesting. Like, yeah, I know people are really opinionated on this stance, and I don't see that on a lot of other platforms. So I think it is really interesting to see it from this stance, and to really consider, you know, the ways that he does fall short for some of the other daughters. But in terms of a husband as well, I actually think the dynamic that he has with Mrs. Bennet is right, because what use would it be if he was freaking out as well? I think she'd die. I genuinely think she'd have a heart attack. If he was freaking out about everything and she was freaking out about everything, I actually think the fact that he seems so distant from the problems is probably helpful for her. Like, I know that she's freaking out, but I genuinely think the fact that he stays so, like, calm, even if he's not, I think probably makes a massive difference. And also just tries to make it humorous. Like, don't take it so seriously. Like, I'm just joking. I have seen Mr. Bingley. Just playing with you, like, I feel like sometimes turning your anxieties into something that is humorous is sometimes better than encouraging someone else to panic with you.
I think that's right. I think it is adaptive, right? Because I think it's good that he stays calm, and I think he would be a lot more annoyed or angry with her if he took everything she said seriously. So I think instead of getting annoyed, if he can turn it into humor, that keeps him calm. And so sometimes I think that's good. Sometimes I think it diffuses it. It reminds Mrs. Bennet not to take everything so seriously. And sometimes it makes her, like, when he winds her up, sometimes it inflames it a little bit too. But usually at the end, he can calm her down.
Yeah, but when she knows he's done the right thing, she's like, ha ha ha, isn't your father such a funny guy? Like,
That's true. Yeah,
it just lightens the mood a little bit, because otherwise she's just so intense. I mean, she's absolutely hilarious, but yeah, I do like that element. And I love in the 1995 one, the last comment that they make when he puts his arm around Mrs. Bennet, and she's like, Mr. Bennet, God's been so kind to us, and like he's like, yes, he has, and then like you see Darcy and Elizabeth kiss. I just think that's like such a lovely scene, like just to show that obviously I don't really think it's a toxic relationship necessarily. I think personality-wise, they don't click, but I do think there is mutual affection there for the sense that they're going through life together. Does that make sense?
Yes. I think toxic is too strong of a word. I think they realize pretty early in their marriage that they're not the most compatible in some ways, but they make it work, and they get to a balance. They always come back to a balance, and so you could argue like it's functional.
That is everything from us today. I really enjoyed that. That was such a fun episode. Caily, do you want to let everyone know where they can find you?
Sure. I'm on Instagram. My handle is at _agony_half_hope. And I post literature and psychology quotations and a lot of Jane Austen stuff. So I'd love to see you there. And we'd love to hear your feedback and your opinions on all of these topics. We always love to hear what you think. So thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Of course, I had the best time. And as always, guys, you can find me over on Instagram at What the Austen. I share stuff on there pretty regular, so it would be great to have you over there. That's everything from me today, and I will see you in another episode.